Hello, Santiago. Hola.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I have all the three wines here with me. They've been poured out for a bit, so they've had a bit of air. Um, I guess maybe we should start with the Imposibles, the 2019, and then move to the
Exactly.
other two.
Yes, and the order of the other two would be first first the Terrazas, and then the
Yeah,
Laderas. First the
great.
pale label, and then the dark label.
First the Terrazas and then the Laderas. I'm very excited to hear the
Yes,
story
correct.
behind all three of these. Yeah.
Stories we have galore. They're all of them are 100% Malbec. But Imposibles is not in Mendoza; it's in the Salta province. You know, Salta, way northwest corner of the country.
Right. What would be the appellation
And
for
within
Imposibles? Is it Salta?
Imposibles is Valles Calchaquíes, Salta. Calchaquí Valleys hyphen Salta.
Got it.
Because the
Thank
Calchaquí
you.
Valley, the valley itself extends through three different Argentina provinces.
Mm.
We have within the Calchaquí valleys, it's in the micro region of Angastaco. Angastaco, Angastaco, which I know in English is a mouthful.
Angastaco. No, it's not too bad. It's phonetic.
Okay, that's it's a name from the time of the original people. I don't know exactly what it means, but it's Angastaco.
Great. And so when did you, is this the first vintage that you've made of this?
It is the first vintage. The thing is, let me backtrack a little bit, because what we're trying to do in Matervini is a study of terroir comparisons through only one interpreter, which is Malbec. It's our conviction, and after many years of making wine in Mendoza and in Salta and throughout Argentina, that Malbec is the only variety that has the adaptability, the plasticity to do well in all of Argentina. So, you know, Cabernet Franc is fantastic in Uca Valley, in the higher regions, and Cabernet Sauvignon does very well in Maipú and in Agrello and Luján. Merlot does only well in Tupungato because it's cool and fresh, but Malbec does well everywhere. It does well from Patagonia to Hui Hui. It does well from 300 meters above sea level to 3,300 meters above sea level. And in every single location where I've made wine, Malbec is the best wine. In the locations where I make good Cabernet Franc, Malbec is better. In the locations where I make fantastic Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec is even better. So, but that is not the only element. The other element, which is fantastic at the Malbec, it turns its ego down. That's my metaphor. You know how there's some actors in the movie business who always play the same part. Say Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson is always the same actor, or Bruce Willis. He always the writers write his character for the movie. He's not interpreted. He's playing himself. There are other actors who are versatile, and in the old times, Peter O'Toole would be a fantastic Shakespearean actor. Nowadays, Johnny Depp in the movies changes from movie to movie. In that sense, Malbec is a good actor, because when it finds a terroir that has character, has potency, has something to say, Malbec takes a step back of its own personality and allows the terroir to shine through. Therefore, in each region where you have Malbec changes and adapts and is different and makes different wines. Much more so than the next case, for example, here in Mendoza would be Cabernet Franc. And Ale Vigil is making his Gran Enemigos with a big chunk of Cabernet Franc. But I find that Cabernet Franc varies less from place to place than Malbec does. And that's why we've chosen pure Malbecs, 100% Malbec.
Did you ever try to blend and I mean, I'm sure you did, but do you not find that perhaps with a bit of this somewhere and a bit of that somewhere, what led you to really have this vision of producing single vineyard terroir driven Malbec?
Well, I've done it for curiosity. I've done it pushed by my partner Roberto Cipresso, and again and again and again we find the same result. The blend of the single vineyards is a wine that adds complexity and loses its character entirely. Because, a personality, a blend of personalities is not a personality at all. It's a non-personality. Personalities are lost through blending. You can't take a wine that is sexy and a wine that is austere and have some personality in the middle of that. Personalities are lost by blending. Complexity is gained, but personalities are lost. And I find the wines more attractive. This is not always. There's many vineyards that don't have character. And when the vineyard doesn't have character, then you are better off blending because you have the complexity to gain and nothing to lose. You go from having simple fruit to having complex fruit. But in the cases the vineyards do have personality, then that is worthy of saving, of keeping by not blending. And so we gain the complexity by taking the route of low yields. All of these wines are a ton per acre or 2,000 kilos per hectare or less. And the second step that Matervini wants to do is not only terroir comparison, but geology comparisons. In the sense, there are very few vineyards in Argentina that are planted on non-alluvial terrain. And Mendoza is entirely on the alluvial fans of different rivers and different glaciers coming out of the Andes. There are very few vineyards that are on the hillsides, very few vineyards whose geology is not mixed up. And the mixing up of the geology is a limitation to the ability of that terrain to impart character to the wine. And so how did we get to Angastaco? We were looking for vineyards on non-alluvial geologies. And we already had two wines from Salta, the Alteza wine and the Calcha wine. And we were introduced to this guy, Francisco Moreno, who told us he had a farm in Angastaco, and he said, come visit. And we went, and we were just blown over by the beauty of the place, by the magnificence. It looks like an alpine valley, but with the saguaro cactus and the ochre mountains of the northwest Argentina. So very steep hillsides on the valley, little valley floor, and he has a property that he told me the size, but it's like 10,000 hectares, 25,000 acres, of which he has water enough for 100 hectares. So like a tiny minuscule portion of his property can produce anything that you plant. The rest, only goats roam the mountains. And he has these soils of pure decomposed granite. That's a beauty to grab what seems to be a solid rock face, and you can crumble it because it's been so exposed to weather and time that it just crumbles, and you can see the plant being able to exchange nutrients with that soil. And we said, are you willing to work with us? Because that's another condition. Our farming is very, very OCD, I would call it, obsessive compulsive disorder. We do a lot of stuff to reduce these crop levels. It's not enough to throw grapes on the floor. You need to balance the plant to a new metabolic rate. And that takes a lot of work in the vineyard. And Francisco was willing to get on board with our program. And so now we have, 2 hectares of one block, which is called Los Cardones Centro. He has 3 Los Cardones blocks, south, center, and north. And this grape comes from the Los Cardones Center.
And sorry, were there vines planted already, or did you go in and plant new vines?
No, he had planted already.
He had planted already. So how old would these vines be?
7 years old, 8 years old, not more than that.
Ah, okay.
So, which is extremely rare, because normally these young plants do not produce wines of this character, of this intensity, complexity, structure, and sharing at the same time the intensity and the drinkability, because these wines are vibrant. They are very good acid structure, ripe, but very intense acid structures.
Very, very pure fruit. So these vines would still be at a very high metabolic stage then. So I guess you, as you were saying before, you would need to do a lot of work in the vineyard.
This was the first year. And I don't like to sell myself ahead of the game, but we are happier with 20 and 21 than we are with 19. We are very happy with 19, but 19 is a starting point. 19 is the starting point for this vineyard. Because
I'm very excited to try this then.
Two things going on with this vineyard. One is the plant gets used to the new metabolic rate, and every year up to the 3rd year, it delivers better and better quality. And second, the plant gets older, which at the same time, every year, more of life is like 15% more age. So when you're 50 years old and you go to 51, that's 2%. That doesn't change a lot. But it's like a teenager. Every year they grow like 10 inches. So these plants will be gaining a lot of wisdom as the years go by.
It's very drinkable and such purity of fruit as well. It's a vibrant, like purple, red, and black fruit.
And this is if you think in terms of geography, this is a vineyard which is in the 23rd parallel. Mendoza is 33 latitude. This is 23, but of course elevation is the compensation of lack of latitude. So it is 2,400 meters above sea level. Very high altitude. The purity of the sunlight is amazing. We were 3 hours tasting grapes, and I got a severe case of sunburn because I was distracted. I forgot my sunblock, and because the day was cool. It was a very cool breeze blowing through the vineyards. This was a month ago, and I was munching on grapes, and the back of my neck, I couldn't put on a shirt the next day. So the purity of the sunlight is also one of the factors that creates fantastic wines all along the Andes.
And in the extremes where this is made in Salta, what would be the sort of average daytime temperatures versus nighttime temperatures in summer?
Daytime temperatures would be a bit more the extreme. The heat waves would go when a heat wave is pushing 35, 38 in Mendoza, like this year, for example, early January. In Angastaco, it was slightly above 30, so it's cooler in Angastaco than it is in Mendoza. And the nights also are cooler just because of elevation. But there's, you would expect, because they are a bit cooler in the extreme, that the harvest would be delayed, but this harvest is early. So this we harvest late February. So around the 20th of February is our harvest, and in Mendoza our harvest is mid-March.
Okay.
Well, there's many harvests in Mendoza, but for Luján, a traditional winemaking region where the winery is, the one you see in the back, we're going to harvest on Monday.
Right.
Start the harvest on Monday. So the missing piece of the equation, so we have a bit cooler days and bit cooler nights and earlier harvest, is the intensity of the sunlight. So that's what provides the missing piece of the equation that explains a plant that can work with. It's like putting this, how do you call these gasolines that have higher octane rate than a normal gasoline? That gives your engine more power. The purity of the sunlight, I think, with Malbec especially, which is very susceptible to a good quality sunlight, and that's why in France it was troublesome, especially in spring, where France gets a lot of shatter in the Malbec, and in Mendoza it does fairly well.
And is it fair to say that with this really extreme sunlight, it will ripen the fruit? You get some ripe fruit flavors, ripe tannins, but then because of the cool nights, it will retain its acidity. So the acidity is actually not lost and still quite high.
I think you are right on, spot on. I would just add another thing, that when you drop fruit below the level of production that the plant can achieve, the plant then is like taking a backpack off a runner. The plant can ripen its tannin at an easier pace. Therefore, the tannin is ripe sooner, and you harvest earlier with better acidity than you would if you had triple. So one of these plants is carrying roughly half a kilo of grapes. And these plants could carry a bit more than a kilo, maybe a kilo and a half each plant. So the plant does not have to struggle to ripen all that 1.5 kilos. It only has to ripen the tannin of half a kilo. Therefore, it finishes the task sooner. You can harvest sooner, and you grab the grape when it's on the point of the curve of the downslope of acidity. You grab the grape when the acidity is a bit higher. So both factors, the cooler nights, the daytime temperature swing, that stops the respiration of the acid at night. That's a true factor. And the other one is less load on the plant, earlier harvest because it's ripe earlier. Because there's I don't taste any green elements. The tannins are supple around. So an early harvest, the risk of that is green. It's not there. The plant was ready when we harvested.
That's fascinating. You're right. There are no green elements at all. It's all very ripe, but just like perfectly ripe dark fruit. And I'm curious, so as the vines get older and they naturally start to metabolize more slowly and produce less fruit per vine, does it naturally regulate itself in the terms of tannins and acidity in that same way?
My experience is, well, Malbec especially, but I think all the most old vines, I tend to see a bunch that gets shorter. So the bunch weight is less, and the grapes get much more complex. So what I find the change is not so much in acid structure and acid respiration curves versus tannin ripening curve. What I see is ever increased nuances in the grapes of an old vine. And I've been in these new terroirs, I have to take new vines because, well, that's what defines a new terroir. But in Mendoza, for example, the Finca wine, that was planted in 1938. So that's what, 84 years ago. And I call it the wisdom of old vines, but it's like a layer cake. It's like a baklava in the Greek or Arab dessert, which is, or we call it, but baklava.
So like a phyllo pastry, like a flaky pastry, but then with honey and layers of nuts.
Exactly, so many layers, very small layers of nuanced stuff going on there. That's what makes an old wine fascinating to me. That's why I listen to viticultural people that from Chile. I had a guy the other day visiting from Chile, and he said we are on a program that we rip everything out when it is 35 years old, and we replant. I said, what? Are you? Because they have other goals. They want to meet a price point, meet a cost target, and older vines. You said it; they are less productive, and so they get pulled out. I was in pain when he told me that. I would nurture these vines for my grandkids, the ones that are already 80 years old. I would try to leave them to my grandkids, who are 2 years old now.
Okay, shall we move on to Piedras Viejas?
Okay, the Piedras Viejas Terrazas.
Terrazas.
This wine, you guys have been tasting for some years now, but it is only called Piedras Viejas.
Yes.
So this is a new name for the Piedras Viejas wine because a new block came into production. The Laderas block came into production, which had not been in production before 2018. So 18 was the first year we made Laderas. And when we tasted the grapes, we knew these were different. So we fermented them separately. In 18, there was only 2 barrels. In 20, we didn't make any 19s because of the frost. And in 2020, we made 5 barrels. So we have a bit higher production, 4 or 5 barrels. I don't remember. So we barrel aged them separately. And by the end of the year, we knew these are different wines. So we had needed to rename the Piedras Viejas into Piedras Viejas Terrazas, because these are 2 blocks. They're in a slope, but a slight slope east. And the Laderas is a steep north-facing slope and a steep south-facing slope. I'm talking 30 degrees in the north-facing slope and 45 degrees on the south-facing slope. Very steep.
Wow, okay.
So that's why the name of the other one is a terrace by comparison.
I see. Okay, so Terrazas was what you used to call Piedras Viejas.
Exactly. It is the same wine. It's from the same blocks that Piedras Viejas, no second name, was, and now it has a nickname because it has a brother. You know, that's how you get nicknames. You get brothers and you get nicknames. This vineyard is I've been telling James that he has to come to this vineyard to visit because it's this vineyard was born from the desire to find original soils, non-alluvial soils in Mendoza. And the only way I drove around Mendoza for 4 years until I found this. And the solution was clearly going to the mountains to find original soils. That's where the soils are that have not been moved from their place, therefore they're not mixed up. But the Andes don't have soils because the Andes is too young a mountain range. The Andes is 30 million years old. The Precordillera, the mountain range due west of the downtown Mendoza, is 300 million years old. So it's 10 times the age. And actually the Precordillera has risen and been eroded 3 times. So the soils that are there in place have risen and eroded. For example, most of the Terrazas wine is on, the soil is on a rock called lutite, which is a sedimentary rock. The buildup of this rock originally is river mud flats that is pile on each other, and they are when they have high organic content, that is, they're in the middle of a jungle or something like that, the rock turns out black. The black part of the rock is because the high organic content of this original mud, these rocks have like one side painted white, which is basically just calcium carbonate that percolated through the dirt and deposited on the rock bed. And you know when you're not alluvial is when the rocks, instead of being rounded, are fractured, a sign that they haven't rolled downhill. Well, this is you have the angles of the rocks.
I know how you were saying earlier about you gain complexity by blending, but when you have an amazing terroir, you get that amazing expression. But this is so complex. All the aromas on this, you get flowers, you get blue fruit, black fruit, even a bit of orange zest and minerality. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I love, in this wine, I love how the mineral aspect kind of is melded to the tannin structure. It's kind of, you don't sense where one finishes and the other one starts. The whole acid, tannin, mineral, it's a continuum. There's no break. It's difficult to break down where one ends and where the other one begins. These vines we planted ourselves. We planted these vines in 2008, and we've been up. There's no vineyards up there. Nobody has planted vineyards. Nobody's planted orchards. Nobody has planted anything. There's only goats, and further up, some guanacos and some llamas. But there's no agriculture in this elevation. It is 1,600 meters above sea level. Which means everybody is your enemy, because everybody wants to eat salad at Piedras Viejas. Goats love our vines. Rabbits love our vines. Wild foxes love the grapes. You've read the Aesop fables. Everybody up there is an enemy. That means every time something happens, we end up replanting 15% of the vineyard. But I had a fight with my prior partner at Achaval, my previous winery. He did not want to buy this vineyard, the land. And once we voted for it, we bought it, but then he didn't want to plant the land. I ended up saying, okay, Manuel, I know the vote went against you, but I want to keep a healthy relationship with you. I will take the land myself and I will plant it. And then I will sell the grapes to Achaval when some become available. And I did that, and we planted in 2008. When we sold the winery in 2011, there were no grapes. Therefore, the new owners, it was not part of the company, and the new owners didn't want anything to do with a vineyard that after 3 years was not producing grapes, 3 years and a half. The first grapes came in 2014. So that's 6 years after planting. Normally, here in the valley floor, in 3 years, you have a healthy crop. There's 6 years, we had just a tiny sample. The first healthy crop, I think in quantity, even though yields are very, very low, was 2018, so 10 years after planting. Wow. So it's even worse than in Europe. You know how in Europe, a plant takes you 5 years to achieve full production? This took us 10 years. I think it speaks, the soil is difficult for the vine. We have a pH in the soil of 8.2. Soils are fairly alkaline, and the vine has to struggle to deepen its roots, has to struggle to grow. Being so high up in the mountains at this latitude, which is 33, the growing cycle, if you don't get your shoots, whatever length you're going to get from your shoots, you need to get in between 45 and 55 days. If it doesn't grow by then, it is December, and the hot sun of December sets in, and the plant does not grow anymore. And if you're left with the short shoots, you can't you cannot have any bunches on that.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful wine. So how was 2020 compared to 19?
2020, so let me backtrack to 18. 18 was a traditional, I'd say warm, not hot year, but a more traditional weather than we used to in Mendoza. 19 was cooler than that. 19 has a vertical position that is driven from freshness of the vintage. 20 is like in the middle of 19 and 18. So a bit warmer than 19, not as warm as 18 for us. And actually the 20 wines, were like those late development teenagers in barrel. They didn't show a lot of stuff until September. So I spent the whole winter saying, what's going on with these 20s? I like the grapes. I like the early stage of the fermentation. What's going on with the wines that I'm not finding it there. And only in September, these wines started like to wake up. Well, we bought a year after that. So all these wines go roughly 18 months in barrel. But compared to other years, it took them some time. Winter was not good for them. And from spring, following the harvest and across the they started blooming. And that's why I said a late growing teenager.
So they were a bit reserved to start with.
Yes. And that's not something I can correlate with strictly weather, strictly the coolness or warmth of the vintage. Another vintage that did just that was 2008. And again, it's not, 8 was, I was drinking 10s before I was opening 8s for my cellar, because the 8 was always like at a glacial pace of evolution. And I think these 20s are going to be similar to 2008.
That's really interesting. Well, there's only one way to find out, right? Wait another 10 years or so.
The number one rule is survive. The second rule is stash some wine. Keep some set aside. Don't drink all you have.
Wonderful. Okay, shall we move on to the laderas?
Let's do laderas.
So is this a much smaller block within the main vineyard? Okay.
It is one hill that runs east-west, and it's within the extension of this alutite, it's not a plateau, but this inclined plane that is growing towards the mountains is the lutite, the Terrazas blocks. This is a hill that is like protruding from the terraces, and it is east-west. So it has a north face and a south face. And it is pure limestone. It is limestone from some 40 million years ago. It's limestone from back in that time. There were shallow seas within the continents, within the Americas, all up to the North America, shallow seas. And when as the seas being shallow, there was not a lot of pressure on the elements that built up the limestone. So it's like layers of limestone that half an inch thick that easily break off, and then the tectonics just, instead of being flat, the tectonic movements put them at this angle. So that's beautiful because they break open this way, water can go in, and the roots can follow the water. So, but it's pure white limestone. The exposed surface of the limestone, it turns a little green. So there's a copper component there, very good for the health, the fungal, almost no fungal diseases in that hillside, because, in winter, where the spores live until next year, the spores of botrytis and peronospora, gray and white mold, the spores in this vineyard over here live in the soil. When these spores fall to the soil, they die because it's aggressive, it's alkaline, and there's copper there. So it's a very healthy, almost no sprays in this block.
Mm. And did you say that it was planted before but wasn't producing fruit, or why is this a new?
First, the limestone is the more basic alkaline of the soils. Mm. So it has a higher pH. That's where the 8.2 comes from. The other ones are 7.9, 7.8. There's no topsoil. There's just crumbled limestone. There's almost no organic content. You see, there's weeds, there's vegetation growing there, and we've been careful to not take away the vegetation. So we planted in the middle of the other plants. So the purpose is to, if you take off the live plants from the soil, the danger is runoff and erosion. So we've been very careful to not impact the soils in any way. We've not terraced, we've not cut into the mountain. We just plant the vines, make a hole, plant the vine, and just we mow what is around it. But we leave all the varieties of plants that will live in there grow. And actually, what happened there was, this was before we put a wire around this vineyard, a fence. This was what goats would eat, and there was overcropping by goats. And so slowly across the decades, the selection, the plants that had been grown were the quickest growing plants. And since we put a fence and we closed animals from coming in most of the time, and we started watering, you see a more complex ecosystem growing in next to the vines. Small flowers, cacti growing in again. And so the natural ecosystem of this block is coming back from degradation by overeating of the animals. So it's seen a more nuanced ecosystem, alive system. And all of that ends up being good for the vine, because those are roots that go into the soil. Those roots then die, become part of the soil, and slowly the vine is going to find a more alive soil, so that has biomass and not only rock. So, and that's the kind of soils I like. So that the lack of this biomass in the soil was one factor that took it 10 years to get our first production.
I see. I'm getting a lot of like slightly riper fruit with this. Maybe there's more sun on, as you said, because it faced north south, or.
But this north one would be the sun, but there's a south one which is less sun for us.
Yeah.
But my 2 cents is this soil is white.
So it reflects some of the sunlight.
It's reflected sunlight back into the canopy from another place which is not directly above. That's my 2 cents. So again, when you're a big winery, you can run experiments. When you're a small winery, you have to walk the vineyards and taste and just draw some hypothesis. But it's difficult to verify But to me, the missing link. Remember that in Angastaco, I told you the missing link between cooler days and nights and earlier ripeness is intensity of sunlight. To me, the missing link here is, a bit less production per plant, because these plants are struggling more. That's one factor. The other one is white light, bouncing light from below, from the soil, white soil.
It's fascinating because it's quite a big wine. You've got a lot of like dried and stewed fruit character, and even some I get a bit of like roasted espresso notes. but then the acidity is it's quite firm. You've got this like solid core and structure to it.
Yeah. See, both of these wines share this. You can tell they're brothers or cousins, maybe, but you can tell they're family because they share this. And I think most of it is in the identity, the tannin structure. And then they split apart. As you said, there's more vibrant red fruit and the Terrazas. There's a darker note, which is again a factor of the ripeness, and in the Laderas. Some of it may be also that these are, even though they were planted roughly at the same time, these are younger vineyards in their metabolic rate. And their stage of life in which they are now. So we have to explore and see how this moves on. If you remember in the earlier Terrazas, like the 14 and the 15, and even the 16, those had a bit of this character, and then they evolved in one direction. And I foresee this one opening up into more complex fruit flavors, but not in the same direction.
Fascinating. Well, we'll wait and see. Great. That was very interesting. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
No.
I always tell people that the second best activity I love doing is talking about wine. The first is making the wine, but after making the wine, I really enjoy talking about wine. In fact, I tend to overdo it sometimes and talk too much. But
I'm a very massive nerd myself, so I love all of this chat. And I mean, I love tasting these wines. They're beautiful wines to taste, but if you have the context as well, and all the explanation behind it, it's like a light bulb moment sometimes.
Yeah, as you said, you understand the wines of a place by knowing more about the place, and the best knowledge source is spending an afternoon and an evening there, watching the lights, because this is a balcony over the Mendoza, this downtown Mendoza. So watching the lights turn on in downtown Mendoza from 800 meters above them, and then you get the vineyard, you understand the vineyards.
Well, anyway, Santiago, thank you so much for staying up. Really interesting chat. I loved it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.
My best to James.